Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Connect, Living and Working in the Now. My name is Nikisha Rashid. I am a sales and marketing consultant with Newcom Media, Inc., and a proud member of the TTC board. And today I have the pleasure of being your virtual MC. Today we have over 100 attendees with us, so thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it, and we are definitely going to have some fun together. So we are going to be learning some great info from our panel experts. We're going to be networking, and we're going to be winning prizes. So I will be handing it over to Cynthia Nagamatsu, our club's president, shortly to introduce our expert speakers. But first, just some quick logistics. We will hear from our panelists for approximately 40 minutes, and then we'll be having a 15 to 20 minute Q&A session. So be sure to type your questions. Click on the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to get to all of as many as possible at the end. And for the prizes, we will be giving away copies of the book by Dr. Dayna Lee-Baggley entitled Healthy Habits Suck, How to Get Off the Couch and Live a Healthy Life Even When You Don't Want to. And for everyone that's currently online, you have been entered into a raffle draw to win a 2-hour coaching session with Brenda Landry. Winners will be announced at the end, so be sure that you stick with us until then. Also, when you registered, everyone was given a choice to opt into an additional networking opportunity. Thank you so much to everyone that did. The list will be sent out post-event. If you haven't done so, you still have the opportunity to do so by emailing Maggie@torontotransportationclub.com, MAGGIE@torontotransportationclub.com. So without further ado, handing it over to Cynthia Nagamatsu, Vice President of Commercial Client Services at Hargraf Insurance and our current TTC President. So Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you, Nikisha, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this webinar. I'm so pleased we are joined today by our two experts who will be talking to us about living and working in the now. Aside from imparting their wisdom, you'll hear useful tips on how to succeed in your career in a virtual environment and your psychological well-being and taking care of your mental health. If you didn't know, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week in Canada. The club and its sponsors understand the value in us staying connected and taking care of ourselves. I want to thank all our webinar sponsors for your support today. Apps Transportation Group, Canadian Tire, CH Robinson, DLT Labs, Echelon Insurance, Evoke Consulting, Hargraf Insurance, Hubbard Insurance Group, Motive Media, Old Republic Insurance, Penske, and Wabash. As a president, it's been important to me how the club moves forward. We spent a good amount of time thinking about how to add value and engage our members in ways that are different from what we've known in the past. It could be a while before we see each other on a golf course or maybe at an event. More than ever, I believe it's important that we don't go quiet and that we do connect. The TTC's first virtual event was hosted by Jeff Priest, and it was a huge success. If you missed it, check it out on our website. It took place soon after we settled into the pandemic and as we were developing ways to connect and our club remaining relevant. A word often used with relevant is connected. And as COVID swept our communities and our lives, the need to stay connected became more imperative. When we talk at the board level and plan our webinars now, we all work from the mission to connect, from the mission of our members to connect with us. After all, this is where the industry meets. I want to thank Kathy Carton, Motive Media, for developing the Connect brand for the TTC. This new branding will take us well beyond the pandemic and a reminder to all of us to continue to reunite, and connect. Stacey Carroll and Kathy Carton took the lead on this virtual event, and we are proud to present you with this webinar. Thank you, Stacey, Kathy, and the entire committee, including Nikisha Rashid, Maggie Patton, and our Executive Director, Denise Carty. As well, Jeff Priest, for all your previous hard work in helping us improve our connectivity. Isn't that what today's all about? Hopefully you have given your permission to share your credentials. And as Nikisha just said, if you haven't, there will be opportunity later on. I really do believe that today is an opportunity for you to springboard from this particular webinar into a future conversation with those who have made that choice to share their credentials. After all, we're trying to connect and network. Later on today, you'll be hearing from our experts who have a great knowledge on their subject areas. I'm sure you'll be inspired and learn more. So I encourage you to reach out to Brenda and Dayna following this event. We're so excited to have Brenda Landry present to us today. I'm sure many of you remember her as our fabulous moderator at the Ladies Luncheon for the past 7 years. She and her company, Evoke Consulting, are back in Toronto and are thrilled to have her speak with us today. Brenda's an expert in leadership and communication and has trained thousands of leaders from around the globe with a lasting impact, including many from our club's membership today. Brenda will bust some myths on topics such as building relationships in a virtual world and upping your virtual presence. I'm equally thrilled to introduce you to our second speaker, Dr. Dayna Lee-Baggley, who's a registered clinical psychologist and the author of Healthy Habits Suck: How to Get Off the Couch and Live a Healthy Life, Even If You Don't Want to, How Pandemic Appropriate. When she's not delivering therapy to cancer patients, teaching medical students at universities, or writing books, she's providing healthy workplace interventions for employees, teams, and leaders, and building professional resiliency. She was the recipient of the 27 Women of Excellence Award and in her contributions to health, sport, and wellness. Today, Dayna will bust COVID myths related to psychological well-being. In advance of today's webinar, I'd like to personally thank you both, Brenda and Dayna, for your contributions to our virtual event. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to our experts, Brenda and Dayna. Thank you.
Well, thank you for such a wonderful, glowing introduction. We are very excited to be here. Dr. Dayna, as we call her in our circles, and I have done some work together over the past year and are very like-minded in our ambition and our efforts to help people thrive despite the circumstances and despite the situation. So we were thrilled to be asked to be your panelists today. And as Cynthia and Nikisha have suggested, our theme is really about busting some myths. So today, Dayna and I are sort of going to tag team for the next little bit, and we're going to bust some COVID myths. So Dr. Dayna, are you ready? I'm going to kick it off with probably the biggest one that's probably top of mind for a lot of people, which is a myth that some might agree with right now that says that COVID-19 hasn't really impacted me.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'm delighted to talk about the subject. So I think it's helpful to start a bit with understanding how our brains work. And so there's two kind of relevant parts to understanding how we respond to something like COVID-19. The first part of our brain is what I refer to as our caveman brain or survival brain. And this part of our brain is actually responsible for a lot of things, including things like emotions, automatic thoughts, learning, memory, appetite regulation. And this part of our brain is ideal for survival. So it gives us great advice if we are survival, particularly if you are cave people, right? If you're battling things like tigers or bears, it gives you excellent advice if your life expectancy is about 30. And it functions automatically and unconsciously. So you can't turn it on and you can't turn it off. For example, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you will pull your hand away before you consciously register pain. That is your caveman brain in action, trying to protect you from something harmful. The other useful part of our brain to understand is the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. And this part of our brain is responsible for controlling behavior. These are executive functioning. So things like inhibiting behavior, initiating behavior, delaying gratification, planning. This is where willpower comes from. This is where self-control comes from, but it primarily controls behavior. It doesn't control emotions or automatic thoughts. And unlike our survival brain, which is functioning all the time, our frontal lobe is more like a battery. And so we will wear out that battery and use it up as we get through our day. This is why, for example, you're more likely to have binge eating in the evenings compared to the mornings, because our frontal lobe battery has been used up and we don't have as much self-control left at the end of the day. And but your caveman brain is always working. And so it's happy to offer you some short-term fixes for your mood, which your brain absolutely will respond to sugary, salty, fatty foods and make you feel good in the short term, at least. Right. So in COVID-19, our caveman brains are on fire and our frontal lobe batteries are incredibly spent. So our caveman brains do not work on probabilities. They don't care how many cases are in your neighborhood, right? They function simply on the detection of threat. And just like if you put your hand on a hot stove, your survival brain will react. The presence of a threat causes our brain to react. And it initiates a cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters that are excellent if you're fighting a bear, for example, right? They're often not as useful in our modern world and facing the kind of stressors we do especially in COVID-19, but also in our modern world. And so you can't turn this on, you can't turn it off. You have no choice about how your caveman brain is reacting. And this is where emotions come from, right? And it will register a threat. Again, it does not care it doesn't work on probabilities, and it will respond accordingly. So even if we're not consciously aware of it, our brains are reacting to threat and they are doing the things that they need to. So it's a common thing people have talked about, for example, gaining weight during the pandemic. This is for lots of reasons, right? If you're in lockdown and stuck at home, but appetite regulation is also managed by your caveman brain, right? And we're using up our frontal lobes because they're spent on COVID-19. And there's a cascade of like hormones that will change that make it harder to lose weight when you're under stress. Again, this is not something you get to choose, right? When we're under stress, a lot of cognitive processes don't work properly. We don't pay attention as well. Our concentration is not as good. Memory doesn't work as well. So if you notice yourself forgetting things, that's what happens for brains when they're under stress. You have no choice about that. The other part of our brain, right, our frontal lobe, is incredibly spent because it takes way more effort to get through a COVID day than a non-COVID day. All of the things that we need to do, wearing masks, noticing how far away we are from each other, even like resisting hugging someone when you're not supposed to, this all uses up our frontal lobe, right? This simple example of going to the grocery store and how you have to follow the lines and notice how far away you are from other people, this uses up our frontal lobe. And so we're going to see actually a relapse in all kinds of things: depression, anxiety, eating disorders, bad habits, quote unquote. And this is because we don't have enough frontal lobe left to be able to control our behavior the way we did in pre-COVID times. And this is really understandable in times of threat. So psychologically, being in COVID-19 is like being in an active war zone. And if we were in an active war zone, we would all recognize that having the same expectations for ourselves, for productivity, would be ridiculous. Right? If we walked outside and the buildings were all crumbling, we would know, like, why do I feel so anxious lately? Why am I having trouble sleeping? Right? But we walk outside and it looks kind of normal. And so we think we're supposed to feel normal too. But brains don't work well under stress. And so we can't expect to be as productive as we would. Right? If it was an active war zone, we wouldn't ask like, oh, during lockdown, did you reorganize your closets? Like, no, I was just trying to survive. Right? And that would be understandable. And so we really need to recognize that brains don't work properly. They do not work the same, and we really should adjust our expectations. It's a really helpful quote that I heard Dr. Bonnie Henry say, which is that it's the same storm, but different boats, which is the experience of the pandemic is dramatically different depending on your circumstances. If you get to work from home, if you lost your job, if you have children at home, you're trying to schooling from home, those are all really different experiences. I was a frontline provider during wave 1, so I was still going into the hospital and seeing patients. And so these are all different experiences depending on what our boat is. And for example, we actually know that mental health, is declining, that people are struggling during the pandemic. There's lots of data showing that. One of the ones that I think is most interesting to recognize is that, suicidal thoughts and feelings have gone up, and they've gone up for most people. There's also certain like at-risk groups that is higher than the general population. We know this exists, people like who have pre-existing mental health conditions, for example. But one of the groups that's most increasing their suicidal thoughts and feelings are parents with children at home. And so if you have employees who are working from home, have children at home, it is incredibly stressful to do. And we really need to adjust our expectations to acknowledge the incredible stress that we're under.
Well, I was going to make a joke about you explaining my newfound addiction to ice cream, but you ended on a heavy note there. So we'll just pretend that that didn't happen. Okay, so the myth you busted is whether people realize it or not, everyone, every single person is biologically being impacted by COVID-19. The degree to which and how it manifests and looks in your everyday life could vary because of the same storm, different boats sort of theory. So that's good. I would say, though, that the next myth that I'm going to put forward to you, Dr. Dayna, is one that I would have agreed with. So I'm excited to hear your response to it. And the myth is that, all right, if we're all dealing with it, I guess what will make some of us do okay and survive and others struggle more is the degree of resiliency that a person has. So, the myth that I'd like you to tackle now is that we all just need to be more resilient in order to get through COVID-19. Is that the solution?
Right. So, of course, I'm not going to object to resiliency, but I'm going to slightly define it a bit different in that maybe it's not about being more resilient. Maybe it's about falling apart more effectively, because we shouldn't try to get through these things alone. We actually need support. We need to work together. I mean, connect is an absolutely important thing for us to do. And if we don't let other people know either about our boats or our distress, then we can't get the support that we need. And the best way through this is together. We know that social isolation is absolutely detrimental for mental health. And so trying to be strong, which is how we tend to define resiliency, like it's not affecting me, I'm okay, I'm fine, actually might impede our ability to get support from the people that we need, to get our colleagues or our managers to be more flexible, to adjust expectations. And so sometimes it's not about being more resilient, it's about falling apart more effectively so people understand the stressors that we are under. So for example, if you have kids at home or you're trying to work from home, we need to tell our bosses or managers about the stressors we're facing so that we can have appropriate expectations about the kind of work that we can get done. So, the part that I would say we don't have any control over the stress, right? But we can work on charging our frontal lobe. So this would be a really good tip for everybody, is to think about charging your frontal lobe. And if you think about how often you have to charge your cell phone, that's how often we have to charge our frontal lobes too, because we use it up every day. And so a recharging activity is something that makes you feel more energetic at the end than when you started. And so common things for most people would be things like sleep, eating healthy foods, staying hydrated, physical activity, and social connection. But there's also individual differences, right? So for an extrovert, being around people, even 6 feet apart with masks on, is probably, energizing. For an introvert, that might be draining. And so we're trying to look for things during our day that kind of make you smile, that just kind of make you feel a bit lighter, and to see, is that something that you could repeat? Is that something you could do again? And we want to have a routine to our day that includes recharging activities, because again, our frontal lobe batteries are being spent so quickly. And so if we focus on, recharging our batteries, and it's also to recognize that, again, if we were in like a war zone, we would recognize, proms don't happen and Halloween might not happen and birthday parties get missed. These are real losses. There's the big losses, obviously, if you've lost a loved one or if you've lost a job, but there's a lot of little losses, and no amount of resiliency is going to make those things go away. We actually should just acknowledge that those things are happening and that life gets incredibly disrupted if you're living in a pandemic. A lot of things we want to have happen won't. And so our desire to pretend like everything is normal is actually making us all crazy, because it's not normal and we can't expect things to function the way they normally do. And so it's also really helpful to just validate people's feelings. And I often like to say that validation ends in a period. It doesn't include a but, right? So we often will say things like, oh, it's really sad you didn't get to go to prom, but we'll find some other way to celebrate. Or, oh, it's too bad, soccer season didn't happen this year, but we'll find some other way for you to play with your friends. If we really want to validate someone, it ends in a period. It really sucks that you didn't get to play soccer this year, period. And I actually encourage you to say the period out loud, especially if you're managers or leaders. There are many, many things that we can't solve in a pandemic. I was working at the hospital. Obviously, if everyone could have unlimited PPE, that would have reduced a lot of stress, but that was not something that our managers could solve. But feeling heard and validated about our stressors, even when we can't fix it, actually does help us cope better. And that's just about acknowledging how somebody feels, not endorsing their beliefs, but acknowledging how they feel. Period.
Well, I appreciate everything that you said, period.
Thanks, Brenda.
All right, do you have a myth for me to bust?
I do. So I've heard some myths myself that I would love to hear your expertise on. One of them is that nothing replaces face-to-face. And so what are we to do with that when most of us are stuck on these online meetings?
Yeah, so, onto the topic of relationship building, there's a lot of people probably tuning in today who are either leaders of teams or sales professionals who are still trying to connect with customers, or even just internal team members who need to be able to work together on projects. And I will say that while nothing replaces face-to-face may be true, so I'm sort of not going to bust the myth. I am going to say that the current situation requires us to create a new business as usual. It requires us to find ways to be as effective as face-to-face is, doing the best we can with what we have, maintaining public health orders and maintaining our personal safety. And as you mentioned before, there are extroverts and introverts who are just comfortable still getting together in person and maintaining social distancing or wearing a mask. So there are some occasions where face-to-face is happening, perhaps on a patio or in a park. But I think most of us can relate to the fact that our days are sort of action-packed with these Zoom meetings all day long. And so, with that, I have a lot of people asking me, so should I just throw in the towel here? It seems like I'm not going to be able to build relationships the way that I was able to before. And so I want to talk about some ways that you can be as effective virtually as you are in person. So the first thing is you want to be mimic in person as much as possible, which is why you end up on Zoom meetings all day long, or Teams, or Skype or FaceTime or whatever your technology is, because this is as good as it gets in many cases. And when we talk about the degree of effectiveness from sort of methods of engaging with folks, these virtual face-to-face encounters are as good as they can get. The second removed from that would be a phone call. I've had a lot of people talk to me lately about the fact that the art of the phone call seems to have gone away, and we're sort of reverting to a lot of emails and texts. But let's not forget about the powerfulness of a phone call. The least effective is emailing and text. Why? Well, we're going to talk about some of the ways you can increase your virtual presence in a moment. But the thing that Zoom and telephone calls have in person is you're able to hear me right now. And in Zoom, you're able to see me. So you can see the expression on my face. You can see my eye contact. But even on a phone call, you can hear my voice. And a lot can be transmitted through your voice in terms of tone, intention, and clarity of message, all of which we know can get very muddied and confused through emails and texts. So I would encourage you, as much as some of you may be feeling a little tired from these virtual engagements, to recharge your battery, as Dr. Dayna has suggested, and dig deep for that energy to connect virtually. because it really is the most powerful way that we have these days at building and maintaining relationships.
Yeah, Brenda,
So-
I often, sorry to interrupt, I recognize that, in previous generations, like, there, except for the baby boomers, every other generation in history has had to deal with a world war or a pandemic. So the baby boomers are actually the exception, not the norm. And I feel super fortunate that we have all these electronic means to connect in ways that they didn't in previous pandemics or previous world wars, where you actually wouldn't talk to somebody, a family member that got sent to the country, because it was a war zone. You wouldn't talk to them for months or possibly years. And so I agree with you about taking advantage of technology as much as possible.
Yeah. Yes. And as an extrovert, I would be like huddled, in a corner right now, hugging myself if I didn't have a means to at least be able to engage with family, friends, and business associates virtually. So I can certainly empathize with that. So when we're thinking about building relationships, I want you to think about two different types of relationships that we have in this world. And the first is personal and the second is professional. I do believe that both types of relationships can be established and developed through virtual engagement. When the TTC is an excellent club for bringing people together in social ways to connect through, whether it be the annual dinner, which I know we're all going to miss this year, on a golf course, the fabulous ladies luncheon. But those events were really special from a personal connectivity perspective. While there may have been a few business conversations sort of happening here and there at TTC events, what was really happening is our relationships were being strengthened. And we weren't all talking business. In fact, very rarely did I actually talk business at a TTC event. It was more about connecting and networking. And so, my encouragement to you is to really find opportunities to create those types of connections with people virtually as well. So if you look at your typical calendar, you probably have kind of business meetings all day long, and your Zoom meetings are kind of business meetings. But if I want to maintain my relationship with Dr. Dayna, I can't only engage her 100% of the time from a business perspective, because it will start to feel like transactional instead of some of those really important underpinnings to relationships, which involve empathy, honesty, integrity, some of those values that we've come to share. So I would say, on the days where you would normally be at an event or at a golf course, find an opportunity to slot some time in your calendar for a connection that is purely building the personal relationship and not for talking about business, because, insider tip, that actually is a business meeting. It's just coming at it from an angle of recognizing that developing relationships is a very important part of developing business. So I'm going to...
Sorry to interrupt, Brenda. I was just going to say that our research lab, we actually we had lab lunches. And so it was a virtual meeting that we had every 2 weeks, and it was drop in, you could come or go. And it wasn't about anything in particular. And it was just an opportunity to connect and do the kinds of things that we would normally when we were in person that we couldn't do, but just an opportunity to connect.
Yeah, that's great. So now I'm going to talk about how to sort of up your virtual presence, how to sort of put your best foot forward when you're presenting yourself online. And this might just be, a one-to-one meeting with your boss. It could be a big team meeting, or it could be a presentation like we're doing today. First thing I will say is, whatever you would normally do to get ready for a meeting in person, all the same rules apply. So you have to get yourself ready. So I call this part of, the meeting preparation. So before you even turn on your camera or open your computer, you need to make sure that you are preparing yourself to be ready for what's about to happen. That might mean doing some research. It might mean reviewing a customer's file. It might mean looking at the last few emails that were exchanged between you and the group, or reading a report. Make sure that you do your homework, so we don't have an excuse to not be prepared for meetings just because we're not in person. Then before you actually are going to be joined by your colleague on the other end, make sure to hop online first and test your mic, test your camera, test your lighting, make sure that your eyes aren't cut off and you don't have something in the back. If I move this banner right now, what you would see is a sink full of dirty dishes. True story. And well, they're not dirty, they're clean, but it is a sink full of dishes. But what you'll see is we've actually prepared ourselves today. We all have, thank you to Kathy Carton at Motive Media, we all have wonderful Toronto Transportation Club Connect backgrounds. We had a dry run for setting ourselves up as panelists yesterday. We were online 30 minutes before you joined us today, did some mic testing with our person who's managing the back. And of course, we all hailed to the wonderful, fabulous event producer, Maggie Patton, as we got ourselves ready. So preparation, you need to think about putting the same time and energy into these meetings as you would going into your in-person meetings. The next thing I would say is, and this is where Dr. Dayna might jump in, but the number one way to have great presence is to be present. To be present. So what that means is minimize distractions. Okay, so my beautiful 6-year-old yellow lab is enjoying some fun time with her friends at daycare today. That's me minimizing distractions. My cell phone is upside down and out of reach so that I'm not being distracted by all of you sending me messages telling me how fabulous my hair looks today. I'm making sure that all of my energy and focus is dedicated to you so that I'm giving you all of my energy. Everything that I'm thinking about is 100% targeted onto you, my audience. So before you get online, get yourself set up. What are you going to need to be able to perform at your top and minimize distractions? So, for some of you at home, a distraction might be a child, it might be a pet, it might be an aging parent who you have to take care of. There could be, there's construction going outside of my apartment today, so I've blocked myself in from a soundproof mechanism. But get yourself set up and make yourself present and minimize distractions. The next thing, that same rules apply as in person as virtually, is eye contact. So the number one way you can actually build relationships with people, whether it's in person or virtually, is done through our eyes. And I have personally tested this theory many, many times in front of live audiences, which you're never supposed to do, but I'm a professional, so I'm allowed to. I was in front of about 150 accountants one year presenting, and they were sort of long, sort of stretched out long and not deep. And I was in front of them for about 10 minutes before I did what you're never supposed to do, which is ask a question which requires a certain answer. But I asked the question, I was just genuinely curious, how many people in the room had felt that to one degree or another, I had begun to build a relationship with them? And thankfully, over half the room put their hands up. And what was fantastic about that and interesting about that feedback was I had not had any one-to-one conversations with anybody in that room. But yet I had, through making eye contact with the people in the room, as I walked across the stage and connected with people just for that minute or two on that moment. And because of that, they actually would go so far as to say that I had begun to build a relationship with them. So that really reinforced to me the power of eye contact. So you may be asking yourself, well, Brenda, how do I do eye contact? Do I stare into the camera? Am I supposed to blink 5 times a minute? What are the rules? There's no rules. What I would say is think about it just as you do when you're in person. I like to recommend that people consider using what's called conversational eye contact. And conversational eye contact means if I was just hanging out with Cynthia on a patio right now, of course, 6 feet apart, sharing a glass of wine, and telling her a story, I would have eye contact with her quite naturally, and it would probably break quite naturally, and then we would rejoin each other quite naturally. So all the same rules with eye contact do apply. When you're in front of a camera and you have notes that you have to consult, which many of us do here today, everybody knows that. It's the same as if you were in person and you had a file in front of you with notes. It wouldn't be rude or unprofessional for you to like drop your eye and look at your notes for a second, right? So we don't need to have these hyper expectations that everybody's doing everything without referencing material. I mean, that's just not realistic. So those are my kind of golden tips on eye contact. Now, the other thing that we have virtually and on the phone, if anybody remembers, is our voice, right? So what do we need to think about with our voice? Well, the very first thing I will say is it is absolutely crucial that your voice is at a volume that is easy for everyone to be able to hear. Now, we do have the advantages of technology to help any of you quiet talkers out there. I'm naturally a loudspeaker. Dayna, you sound quite good today. Dayna, in real life, can be on the quiet side. So, it's really cool that we can use microphones to actually help to amplify us. In many ways, it's easier for us to sound clear and confident virtually than it is in person. So going back to preparation, make sure you do test your mic. Get a friend on your Zoom call ahead of time if you want, just to get some feedback on how you sound. But it is very important that you are heard, especially if you're in a team meeting. Oftentimes I'll have people say, it was difficult for me to be heard. I kept getting interrupted, or my ideas were getting cut off. So, to that, I would say, you really need to make sure that you're finding the opportunities to insert your message. You're being very clear and confident in the way that you present your ideas. And if you do get interrupted, remember your message and look for the moment to regain the stage. The last thing I'm going to talk about with regards to what physically we can do with our bodies is I want you to try to remember that when we're presenting virtually, there is a call for us to be more expressive than ever, okay? So it can be quite boring to listen to people talk like all day long on Zoom meetings. It can be very it can sound very monotone. It can get a little dull. So it requires us, the speaker, to turn up the energy dial when we're speaking. And I have to throw some props to Nikisha, who's doing an excellent job as our MC today. I think she really set the tone this afternoon with her very big, energetic welcome. But that's what's needed. And I'm sure as you all listen to Nikisha open our session today, you were energized and probably feeling quite excited about what was to come. Hopefully we're satisfying you. But you need to turn up the energy dial, and you need to make sure that you're showing and expressing what you're saying. So a few things have to match. The words that you're saying has to match your face, and those things have to match your voice. So if you say, I am very excited for what we're going to talk about today, well, you don't sound or look very excited. In fact, you look like you want to go back to bed. If I say, absolutely, we can definitely get together next week, that will not be a problem. But the whole time I'm shaking my head no, we need to be aware of congruency. So we want to make sure that we're not mixing any messages with what we're saying verbally and what we're saying non-verbally through our physical presence. The next thing I want to talk about is visuals. So a lot of times people have said, well, what about if I want to share my screen, or what about if I want to turn off my camera, or have a PowerPoint playing in the background? I will just caution you one thing, and this is my leadership development training hat being put on here. You are your best visual, okay? So nothing is a better visual than you. If there are if there's data or there's facts that you need to share and you need to swap out your screen and share it temporarily, absolutely, there will be business reasons for why you might need to do so. But you'll notice Dayna and I are not walking you through an 88 slide PowerPoint presentation today. And I would like to hazard a guess that you're all very thankful for that. I certainly hope that we are more engaging to look at and to listen to than a Microsoft PowerPoint deck. So the same goes for you, believe it or not. And the last thing is, when you're presenting, so today we're doing a webinar, which means that other than the Q&A component at the end, we're not getting a lot back from you guys in terms of interactivity. But in your general Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, it is quite interactive, and they are designed to be collaborative. And so if you are leading a meeting or if you're participating in a meeting, I do encourage you to try to use interactive techniques as a means of increasing engagement with the folks who are participating with you. And so you can do things like, there's ways you can raise your hand through technology. You can certainly poke the moderator and ask to be put in line as a speaker. And you can also, of course, use the chat or Q&A column that appears in all of those platforms as well. But invite people to get involved in your conversation, because when they're sort of chiming in with you and when they're engaging with you, it's showing that they're really paying attention, right? They're listening, they're interested, and they're engaged. And that will help you continue to have the energy you need to spit back out to them. So it's a really nice kind of dance back and forth that you get to share when you use those interactive techniques. So,
thank you, Brenda.
Did I crush that myth, Dayna?
Oh, crushed it. Yeah, I'm all over that. Yeah. And Brenda's clearly an expert at being engaging in virtual meetings, and as she is in real life as well. It's helpful to keep in mind that people are going to have different individual risk about the extent to which they want to meet in person, right? So I don't personally have a lot of risk, but I work with cancer patients at the hospital. And so I have dramatically reduced the number of face-to-face meetings that I have because I'm trying to protect them. So this is, again, like same storm, different boats. And there was a question about how do we get people to open up and tell us about what they're struggling with or what might be going on for them. And really, as leaders, like modeling that and sharing your own struggles and your own things you're dealing with is the best way to get other people to open up. And so often leaders want to look strong and not look like they have any problems. But modeling is the strongest way that you can say that something is okay to do. And so often people will ask me like, well, what do we, I know somebody who really needs to go see a psychologist or get some mental health support and they won't go. What should I do? And I say, you should go yourself to go get therapy, because there's no more powerful message to say it's okay to get help than to get it yourself. And so sharing that, I have kids at home too that are going to interrupt me, or that, struggling to have all these Zoom meetings. Sharing those struggles is actually the best way to get other people to open up and to demonstrate that that's okay, that those things are happening, and to find out more about what's going on for people. So we have some more myths though, Brenda. Should we work our way through the next one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the next one that I've also heard is that it's impossible to get noticed at work and advance my career right now. And so maybe I should just keep my head down, work hard. Maybe I should just be thankful that I even have a job, and, just keep my head down and get some work done. So what would you say to that one?
Well, first of all, I would say you should always be very thankful that you have a job. And particularly now, look, we all know somebody whose lives or profession has been impacted by COVID-19. And so, yes, we are all lucky to have a job. And there may be people tuning in right now that don't, and are kind of excited about what might be laying ahead for them. That said, I would say it is also okay to still self-promote. It may feel sort of like this isn't the right time or it's inappropriate, but if today isn't the right time, when we think about the time horizon of COVID-19, this isn't going to be gone like 2 months from now, right? So Are you willing to kind of delay and stall your career and your professional advancement for an indefinite amount of time? You know, it could be another year, could be longer. We don't know. So because of that, I always do say, take control of your own career. And there's no time like the present. COVID is not an excuse to step away from managing your own career progression. So there's this topic called meritocracy. Meritocracy is it's very old school. So it's sort of like back in the 80s and early 90s, there was this thinking that if you just put your head down and you do really, really, really good work, the promotion fairy will come along and tap you on the shoulder and be like, congratulations, you finally put in, you know, the requisite amount of hours and effort, and voila, you got a promotion. Those days are gone, and I think we all know that. Certainly, you have to have results. You have to be a hard worker. I think, you know, everybody who's attending today would say that they are. But what we need to do above and beyond that is we have to help people see and learn about the results that we are bringing into the business. And it's not bragging, and it's not being conceited or arrogant. It's literally just sharing the facts of the results that you've been able to generate for your business. And it's okay to do that. So getting by on hard work alone is not enough. It's never been enough, and it's not enough today. So I would say first tip is use COVID-19 as an excuse to start scheduling regular meetings with your boss. If you don't currently have that set up, I would say, you know what, Cynthia, you know, in person, you and I usually can just walk by each other's offices and have a quick check-in, but we're not able to do that now. So how would you feel about every Tuesday morning at 8:30, we just have a quick coffee chat at 8:30 over Zoom? And she would be like, I would love to. Right, Cynthia? Yes. And so make sure when you have those sessions with them to include time, not only to update them on projects or what you're working on, but also to self-promote, to say, hey, by the way, you know, we had a really great Connect event last week. I know you weren't able to attend, but it was really well done. And I did a great job as a panelist. I think the video is going to be up on the TTC website. So feel free to check me out, Cynthia. Use that time also to strengthen the connection. Don't just talk shop. As I said earlier, use some of that time to ask Cynthia, you know, hey, by the way, you know, I heard that you're getting all settled into your new house. How are things going? You know, I'm looking forward to visiting when it's safe to do so one day. Other thing you can do aside from those weekly check-ins, or perhaps it's bi-weekly, depending on your boss's availability, is to forward emails that are evidence of great work. So perhaps you've had a customer who sent you a kudos and said, you know, Nikisha, I really just want to reach out and tell you what a lifesaver you were for me last week. You really went the extra mile, and it made a big difference to our business. I get those emails. Well, I am my own boss, but I just forward them directly back to me. Forward those to your boss and say, you know, hey, like just put something in there kind of clever, like another satisfied customer. But there's no reason for you to be the only person who knows about what a great job you're doing for your company. And then the other thing is, I really do believe in celebrating wins and celebrating successes. I think it's good for you, it's good for your teammates, and it's good for your company. So for all those reasons, it's good for business. When you've had a win, maybe it's on a new account, or you've been able to close out a deal that you've been working on for a while, make that a public announcement within your company. Make sure to share it. Spreading good news, I'm sure Dr. Dayna will chime in to say that spreading good news right now, it is good. It's a good thing for all of us. And so I encourage you to do that as well.
Yep, I agree, Brenda. And I'll also add that, you know, I struggle with self-promotion, even though I'm clearly fine doing talks and presentations, but that's something I struggle with too. And lots of people do. And so the way I manage that is to think about, what's the purpose behind my work? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this work versus some other work? And, recognizing that I'm doing this work for a reason. There's something important about what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. And that's the reason to share it, right? So writing my book, for example, or even like talking about it is really uncomfortable for me. But I wrote it so that about accessibility, so that people who would never have a chance to talk to a psychologist could have some evidence-based information about how to, be healthier and have the science in a usable way to be able to be healthier. And so I think about that purpose, about accessibility, and that's why I want to talk about it, and that's why I want to share it, because there's some meaning behind it. And in that way, I can get over my own discomfort about talking about myself by connecting it to like the value about why I'm doing that work and what's important to me about that. We also had I don't know if you want to do a question, Brenda, or you want to do the next myth.
Well, let's do the last myth and then we'll jump into our questions.
All right, so the last one is this idea: leading teams is basically impossible now. Everybody's at home, everybody's doing their own thing. So Brenda, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I'd say to that, more challenging, yes. Impossible, no. There's a lot of people who lead teams remotely all the time. Probably many people on this call have teams or individuals that they manage in different geographical areas of the world. And so let's really hope that it's not impossible to lead people if you can't see them in person, because I think our economy would be in big trouble. However, it does require a different sort of leadership style. It requires some different leadership tactics. It has, and the number one thing it requires more of, 100%, is communication. So communication, I would say, is probably the most important leadership quality any of us can have. But when we're trying to lead teams remotely and we don't just randomly bump into each other in the hall to check on each other or build our relationships or provide encouragement and coaching, we need to be intentional about designing interactions with people who are not in front of us anymore. So with most of us working from home these days, almost all of your teams are remote right now. So with that, I would say clear, frequent, and consistent communication are required. So clear, meaning it is more important than ever that you know what it is that you want to say before you say it. We've seen some people in the public eye who have sort of gone back and forth or flip-flopped a bit on their stance or positions with certain things. And all that does is cause confusion. And I don't know what part of the brain has to manage that. Is that our executive function?
Frontal lobe, baby.
Frontal lobe. So we're already sort of like trying very hard to make sense of the world. And if you are providing contradictory or unclear communication to your team, it is actually causing them, more harm than good at this point. So I would certainly say you have to be a bit more intentional and diligent about crafting your messages before you deliver them, so that you're providing really clear communication to your teams or whoever your audience may be. The second is frequent. I'd say really up the frequency of communication. If typically you have a weekly team meeting when you're all in person at the office, this may need to be twice a week. I know teams who are meeting every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, even if it's only for 30 minutes. And I'll tell you, they don't run out of things to talk about. In fact, a lot of companies and a lot of leaders are doing like a Monday and Wednesday check-in, weekly team meetings. And then the Fridays is something social. So going back to that requirement of team building, relationship building, creating personal connections. You've probably seen, and maybe some of your companies have done, some of those like social events you can do on Zoom, like, whether it's make your own sushi or, little whatever cocktail mixing party or whatever you guys are doing, those are actually just as important, if not more, than the sort of project updates that you might be running through on Monday morning. So I would really encourage all the leaders on the phone to give some serious thought. Yes, I am suggesting adding more meetings to your schedule, but these are healthy meetings. These are leadership meetings. And if you are not in a leadership role today, but you think what I'm saying is very smart, because it is, feel free to suggest it to your leader to say, you know what, I feel like I could stand to have a higher level of engagement, and I would, hazard a guess that others may feel the same. So feel free to suggest that. And then, make sure that you're including time to have one-on-ones as well. So, going back to what Dr. Dayna talked about before, same storm, different boat, leadership needs to not be a one-size-fits-all approach these days. So I can't just say, well, if I have a sushi making party Friday at 3:00, then everybody's going to be taken care of. I will be taken care of because I love that stuff. But there's a lot of people who don't love that stuff and may need a different kind of care and attention and empathy shown from you as their leader. And so, I'll sort of pass it over to you to close this one out, Dayna, but I suspect you're going to talk about taking a more individualized approach to leadership at this time as well.
Yeah, for sure. So you talked about consistency, and that's important in terms of your availability, in terms of like your communication. It's okay if you don't actually have all the answers. Even just sharing, here's what I know right now, and I don't have all the answers. That's okay too, because it still lets them know that you're in touch with them, that you're available to them. But because we actually need to be more flexible right now, right? We need to be more flexible because same storm, different boats. People are going to be struggling with different things, and we don't know what those are. We're trying to, have those one-on-ones to ask those kinds of questions too, right? Sometimes it's not so much about knowing what's going on, is being willing to ask, right? Being willing to open the floor up to that. And the thing and modeling those kinds of things. So modeling when we're engaging in self-care, when we're charging our batteries, right? I will tell my research assistant, like, I can't have a meeting then because I'm having lunch, and you should too, right? Or I can't talk right now because I'm going to the gym in my mask and my pod. Because that actually gives them permission to take care of themselves as well. There's nothing more, when we don't model self-care, but we tell other people they should, all we're saying is that if you really want to get to the top, then you can't take care of yourself. You need to just sacrifice everything. But you go ahead and take care of yourself, right? I totally support you in that. And so modeling that is a really important thing, especially now, especially because we have to be way more deliberate about charging our batteries. And so there was a study done that I think captures this idea of the importance of relationships, where they had these two teams that were in a call center, and both teams had the same hours, the same kind of distribution of calls, like pretty much similar. One team worked together really well, and the other team was a total disaster. And the only major difference between the two teams is that the team that was functioning well would get together for 15 minutes before their shift and have coffee together. And that's the power of relationships. That 15-minute where they felt like they knew each other more, they were talking about non-work related things, that allows us to feel like somebody knows us, they have our back, that we're working as a team, that I'm not in this all by myself. And that's the value of focusing on relationships right now versus tasks or productivity. And I sometimes have to remind myself to do that, because I like to just jump in and get to the meat of things. And I have to remind myself to be like, okay, how are you doing? What's up? What's new? Like, let me tell you a bit about what's going on with me. Because I think of those teams and I think the 15-minute coffee break, you got to do that at the beginning of your calls and the beginning of your meetings, and not just jump in right into like the tasks that need to get done. And so, we won't have solutions to all the problems right now, and that's okay. Feeling like we're in a team doing it together and that we're all in this together, actually psychologically, we know makes people feel better, cope better, do better when they feel like they're not alone. And we can do that regardless of whether we have solutions or not.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, those are all the myths that we have. So I guess, am I throwing it back to you, Nikisha, for manning our Q&A?
Yeah, I think so. So that was all some really great information. I just wrote all these notes because I'm definitely one of the people that was like, quarantine isn't affecting me at all. And then one day I cried for like 45 minutes at a Canadian Tire commercial, and I was like, it's just so beautiful. And like, and I was like, I think quarantine is affecting me a tiny bit. Okay, so we do have questions coming in. They're coming from different places. Apologies, just bear with me. And if I say any name wrong, my apologies. Everyone always says my name wrong, so I really apologize if I don't get them right. But first question is from Gabe Broderick at Apps Transport. It says, yes, we have seen the world change in very different ways. New forms of stress are affecting people in the workplace. What can senior management do for their staff to help people through these times? And do you have any ideas of what managers need to address to help people's fears? So I think we've touched on a bit of it, but I don't know if it's worth kind of touching on that again.
Yeah, Dayna, you have anything you want to mention about kind of managing stressors, or might be more of a question for you?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think this is about adjusting expectations and about what's really possible during a pandemic. So sometimes people will say to me like, oh, like, you know, can you do this? And I've had to say no to stuff that normally I would say yes to, because my frontal lobe is not as like charged. It is being used up by other things, and I don't have as much capacity as I did before. And every once in a while, it doesn't happen often, but someone will be like, oh, really? Like, you can't get that done by this date? And I kind of look at them and I say, yeah, there's this thing going on. I don't know if you heard, the pandemic, which is kind of to say, that's not on me that I can't do this. This is on you. Your expectations are unrealistic right now. And so as leadership, we should be checking in with people. And again, it's not to decide what their capacities are. It's to ask the question and to make adjustments based on what they're telling us, right? That responsiveness is what's really key. And asking the question. And also, again, like I tell people in my teams all the time, like, I can't get that done because there's a pandemic going on. Like, I'm not going to get that email done. I can't have that meeting. Why? Because there's a pandemic. And I say that all the time. And I don't think that's giving people a pass. I actually think that's an act of compassion to ourselves and to other people. It's also a really common thing to hear me say, both at home or at work. I'll be like, I'm sorry, my frontal lobe's done. I can't answer that question. I can't do that thing for you. Or like, I really wish I wasn't yelling at you while I'm trying to get my son to bed, but I have no frontal lobe left, which is just a cue to say like, I'm done. I really wish I could show up better in this moment, but I don't have enough frontal lobe to do that. And it's just a cue to let it go. And then we also ask each other, you know, what are you going to do tomorrow to charge your battery? What do you have? There's a little icon on my phone that's a battery. And so we have a little support group. We kind of send that message to each other every day to be like, how's your battery? What are you doing to charge your battery? To create that culture, even if it's not part of the bigger culture, because in healthcare, that's not part of the culture of taking care of yourself. So making this little mini culture about taking care of yourself and what are you doing to charge your battery?
I love that. I love the icon idea.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. So I think this question didn't specify, but I have a feeling this one's for you, Brenda. It says, there's a lot of discussion on existing colleagues, but when cold calling most businesses, like we're not doing face-to-face meeting or introduction. So how do you break the barrier of being seen as a telemarketer to start the process of building a relationship?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I love that we're getting these questions like live time. There's not even like prep for it.
Time to think about it. Yeah,
it's great. I love that. So the first thing I would say is I always say that your performance is determined by you. And what I mean by that is if you think that you're going to come across as a telemarketer and you're going to be a pain in somebody's butt and you're going to be annoying to them, then you probably are. But if you, before you pick up the phone, if you say, you know what, nobody is doing it any better than I am right now. Like everybody who wants to talk to this person is in the same boat. Everybody has no choice but to engage in these ways. It's a level playing field. And so everyone who's cold calling Cynthia today is doing it the same way. There isn't somebody who's actually just walking in to her office and having a leg up or the advantage of face-to-face. So the first thing you have to do is is think about the self-talk that is going through your mind and the story that you're telling yourself about the limitations or the perceived limitations about your effectiveness at building relationships in a virtual world. Because I just tell myself beforehand, well, this is kind of as good as everybody's doing. All right. And then I pick up the phone, I level set and remember that I'm not at a disadvantage here. I'm just at a level of everyone else. And I think positive self-talk will really set you up for a positive outcome.
Right. So, and I will just add to that, which is charge your battery. Make sure you have a charged battery, because otherwise, it's our caveman brain that actually does the self-criticism. That's where the you're not good enough story comes from, and it's very automatic. You can't turn it off. Self-talk comes from your frontal lobe, right? That is a decision about how you're trying to show up. And we can control how we show up. Even when we feel differently, we can show up the way we want to through our behaviors. And that's just about being willing to feel uncomfortable. And I'll also remind yourself about why you're making the call. What's important about the product that you sell or the service that you offer? Why does this person, how will it benefit them? Because if you really believe in your product or your service, then you're not bothering someone, you're trying to help them. You're trying to solve a problem they might have or trying to improve something for somebody. And to me, reconnect with the purpose and meaning behind what you're doing, so that's the reason you're calling, because there's something valuable and important you have to offer, not because you're necessarily bothering somebody.
Oh, great. I think that answers it, right? Anything else for that, Brenda, or should we move on to the next?
That's good.
That's good. Okay. So we have another question from Noor Aslam from, I believe, Transcord Load Link. It says, what is the best approach as a manager to have conversations around non-performance? Someone was performing great, but then moved to working from home, and then performance has now declined. The end goal is to just get performance back up.
Yeah, maybe I'll start, Dayna, and we can sort of kick it over to you. So, without knowing any details, I'm going to give a kind of a blanket answer here. So the first is, is the performance decline attributed at all or in part to COVID? What is happening in their boat? I'll leave that for Dayna to talk about. But what is the cause, I guess, of the decline in performance? If it is simply a performance issue, there perhaps, yes, there are things going on, but at the end of the day, they're not fulfilling their job requirements, and kind of COVID or not, if it wasn't COVID, this person would be probably on their way out the door. The reason Dayna and I are good panelists is I'm hard, she's soft. I sort of come from the feeling of, we don't get a huge pass, right? It's good to be empathetic and to be curious and to understand. But at the end of the day, we're running businesses. And if somebody is not fulfilling their job requirements or their job duties as necessary and as agreed to under their employment contract, then they have a right, and you have a right, to enter into performance management as you would regularly. What I would say is performance management kind of has this really negative, heavy-handed sort of tone to the label. I've always come from performance management from a position of coaching. So I would say, you really want to sharpen your coaching skills. You want to sharpen your ability to have sort of crucial conversations, courageous conversations, learn about, I have a book right here. Where did it go? Hold on, I'm going to get it. I didn't write it, but this is the one I'm reading right now, and it's really good. Anyway, it talks about how to have sort of courageous conversations and how to coach, and it does talk about performance a little bit in there. But I think, when you said in your question that the ultimate goal is to get them back up, it's not to fire them, it's to improve them. So that to me sounds like, you need to have probably a series of coaching conversations where you very courageously, right out of the gate, address what the issues are. And you're talking about, specifically the evidence or the data that you're able to point to that shows that their performance has deteriorated. So please make sure to make it more than just a feeling. You need to be able to attribute the decline in performance to something tangible. And then to be able to coach on that, deliver a message, something such as, I'm confident that by working together, we'll be able to improve your performance in this area. Now let's talk about a plan for how we're going to get there. Set some small goals with them and have frequent check-ins on progress made against those goals. So now I'll hand it over to Dayna, who's going to probably be a lot sweeter.
Yeah, so I wouldn't disagree with anything that Brenda said. Here's a quote from Einstein. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes coming up with a solution. We often rush to problem solving too quickly. So spend some more time understanding the problem. And I just always raise these things as look, everyone's struggling. COVID is hard for everybody. Right? Can we talk about what's going on for you? Because I would guess that both of you want the same thing. You both want this person to perform well. They want to perform well and you want them to perform well. There's a shared purpose there that we can connect on, and that can be the shared goal, is that we both want this person to perform better. So if they were performing well and it's declined, right, that's a different thing than someone who's never been performing well. If they are performing well and it's declined, then what's changed? What's different? Because something has changed. If they were never performing well, that's a different conversation. But understanding what their context is, what their boat is, making it okay to be struggling, making okay that COVID is causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. And again, we might need to be a lot more flexible in how we're going to address these issues in COVID times and in non-COVID times. We know that mental health rates, of mental illness are dramatically increased. So depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts and feelings, they've all dramatically increased. And this is across the board. And so, spend more time understanding what the problem is before we rush into finding a solution.
Excellent. We do have some more questions I hopefully we can get to. So we have a question from Jeff at Bison Transport asking, for video calls, what is your opinion on virtual background and their usefulness, or are they just a distraction that should be avoided? So this is for you, Brenda, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So I am going to take this opportunity to talk about what's happening around you just generally anyway. And I'll include backgrounds. But, the very first thing that I said back when I talked about having a strong virtual presence is I said, you are the best visual, right? So anything that is going to detract from you, and you are right now, I am the brand Brenda, but I'm also the brand of my business. And I want to be at the front as much as possible. I want people to be looking at me, listening to me, and engaging with me, both personally and as a business. And so I want to minimize anything visually that's going to compete with me. So I'm going to try to minimize switching screens and swapping visuals, and I want to sort of remove distractions in that way. So I know I gave a shout out to Kathy at Motive before, but I do think that having these banners is kind of a really nice, consistent branded way. I know a lot of companies who have gotten in touch with Motive who've sort of said, it would be nice if everybody had sort of a company logoed thing behind them. I have one just for my company as well, a little smaller one that I use as well, so that I can take advantage of the platform to really promote who I am or what I'm doing. I think the question was specific to those blurred ones, or some of them, I was on one the other day and it looked like the background was like a stream, like he was supposed to be outdoors fishing in a stream while he was talking to me or something. It's a little confusing, but I would say blurred backgrounds are fine. I don't think they distract at all. In fact, I think they do the opposite of distract because there's nothing to compete with. What you want to do, whatever you choose to do, whether you choose to get a professional background or you choose to use one of the built-in system backgrounds, which you can choose, no matter what you do, you want to test it out for yourself first before anybody's looking at you. So you want to make sure, like, oop, if I turn my camera a little bit too far this way, you're going to see my kitchen, you know. So we want to make sure that we're framed up properly, and that whatever is behind us, you have to remember, is automatically attributed to your brand. So if you see a sink full of dishes, that automatically is attributed to my brand. Somebody is saying that my dead cow head is detracting from my brand. Yes, it is. However, the alternative was I'd have to be like this close, which was sort of bizarre. And I decided that this would be a good conversation piece. So thank you, Neil Christensen. It's nice to reconnect with you. And I'm glad that my cow skull is going to give you all impetus to continue our networking following this event today.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that too, which is I think the important part is like, take some time and effort to set up a backdrop, right? And one of the easiest ways to do that is turn your desk out and face the middle of the room so that you have a wall behind you, and then decorate the wall, right? Because many of us don't have, like, if I was facing the wall as the way most desks often do, especially at home, then I have to deal with the whole room behind me. So turn your desk around, face it outward into the room, and get a wall behind you, and then put some effort into that wall. You're going to be in this space a lot, and it's going to represent you, as Brenda just said. So when, you know, behind this is actually something that I tried to make it look like a therapy room, because I do all kinds of therapy online now. And so I put some time and effort into making that backdrop look meaningful and warm and friendly, and the things that I wanted it to represent. And so I think it's the same thing that, you know, if you had an office and you were thinking about how the office came across, you want to think about how your backdrop comes across as well.
Oh, that's a very good tip. That's so easy. Just switch your desk around. So I think in the interest of time, that we're going to just kind of wrap it up with the Q&A for now. Apologies to all the questions that we didn't get to, but we just want to be mindful of everyone's schedule. So I think for now we have our giveaway. So it feels very anticlimactic. Somebody should do like a drum roll, please, or something. But there we go. So the winner is Noor Aslam from Transcore Loadlink. Yay! We will be in. We'll follow up after post-event with the details of sorting out the prizes. And just to kind of wrap up, we just want to say thank you to everyone who took time out of their day to join us today. Thank you to Dr. Dayna and Brenda for all the great information. You've definitely busted some myths that I thought I was just like crushing for this quarantine. So thank you very much. And the big, huge thank you to all of our sponsors. So Apps Transport Group, Canadian Tire, CH Robinson, DLT Labs, Echelon Insurance, Evoke Consulting, Hargraft Insurance, Hubbard Insurance Group, Motive Media, Old Republic Canada, Penske, and Wabash Canada. So thanks again to our sponsors. That was awesome. And just final note, remember to follow us on social media. A recording of like an on-demand version of today's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to share that with your friends, family, coworkers. I think this information is so pertinent to everyone's day-to-day life right now. And stay tuned for info on our future virtual events and news from the TTC. So thank you to our members and happy Thanksgiving.